on land use, smart growth, and climate adaptation. I'd first like to introduce our three speakers. We have Zelalem Adefris, who's the Vice President for Policy and Advocacy with Catalyst Miami. She oversees Catalyst Policy and Engagement Department, directs all the organization's climate justice work. And her previous work experience includes environmental justice organizing at the Environmental Justice League of Rhode Island and conducting emergency preparedness research for the CDC. She also serves as the co-chair of the Miami Climate Alliance and is a philanthropic trustee of the Solutions, which is a philanthropic trustee of the Solutions Project, and is a board member of the Miami-Dade College Earth Ethics Institute. Next, I'd like to introduce Gero, who was appointed as LA County's first Chief Sustainability Officer in November 2016. Gary previously served as the president of the Climate Action Reserve, and he now serves as the vice chair of its board of directors. Gary's career includes service as the assistant general manager for the City of Los Angeles Environmental Affairs Department, and he also managed renewable and energy efficiency programs at LADWP. Our final speaker is Sharai Lewis-Gruss, who's the director of data enablement at the First Street Foundation. In this role, she applies her background in environmental policy and GIS to help support those seeking access to First Street data. Before joining First Street, Sharai was a GIS specialist at Cowie, North America, where she mapped shorelines in an effort to help reduce vulnerability to sea level rise, storms, and other events. She's also served as GIS manager for the Regional Plan Association of New York and has worked with FEMA. And lastly, this panel will be moderated by Camille Manning-Broome. Camille is a member of the Smart Growth America board and knows a thing or two about planning for future and current climate impacts because by day she serves as the president and CEO for the Center for Planning Excellence in Louisiana. Thank you, Camille, for serving on our board and for moderating today's panel to advance the conversation that Dr. Shepard began. I'd also like to acknowledge we are having some technical difficulties with our ASL interpreters, and we may, we're hoping to have the spotlight back on an interpreter ASAP. Thank you for bearing with us on that. And with that, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Camille. Thank you to Camille and to all of our speakers today.
Great, thank you so much, Catherine, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be with all of you today and so energized by this remarkable summit that the Smart Growth America team has put on. And very excited to learn more about our three special guests. And they're going to talk to us about not only how they're addressing climate change, but what tools we're using and adapting to those climate change impacts in some of our most vulnerable places. I'm going to start with a couple of questions for each of our guests, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A at the end. So please put any of your comments or questions, not comments, your questions in the Q&A chat so that they get filtered to me eventually. So first, I'd like to open it up with a question where I'd like to start with Zelalem. And so we heard from Dr. Shepard about how climate change is disproportionately impacting our historically marginalized communities, and what climate hazards pose the most risk to the communities that you're working with, and how are you addressing these disproportionate impacts in your work? So really, what's the role your organization is planning, and how are you overcoming this history of marginalization through land use policies as you tackle climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a hard question to answer for myself here being based in Miami. But because in South Florida, we face a lot of climate challenges, including stronger hurricanes, extreme heat, sea level rise, the list goes on and on. In addition, I work for a social justice nonprofit organization. So we're uniquely aware of the everyday challenges that people in Miami-Dade County face. Half of the households in our county do not have 3 months of savings to keep themselves above the poverty line in a time of crisis. So when a hurricane hits or we have a situation like the pandemic, it is a mass crisis and economic justice issue for folks across our region, the majority of people. And so I think with every hurricane, with the pandemic, it only underlines that climate change is a threat multiplier. It takes all the existing challenges that people face daily and really amplifies them. But I guess if I have to choose one, I think for the sake of this panel, one unique challenge that we face here in Miami is between climate change and the housing market. It's a term called climate gentrification, and it basically is that as our lower lying coastal areas become riskier long-term investments, our interior neighborhoods and our higher elevation neighborhoods, which is where many of our Black communities are, and Latin communities as well. They are rapidly gentrifying. So yeah, we're seeing massive luxury upzoned projects that are hugely out of scale for the existing neighborhoods, that are displacing many residents and pushing them either out of the county or to lower lying, more climate vulnerable areas in the county. And I saw someone put transportation in the chat, and that is a huge issue. Areas in the county that are far away from jobs and where your community is, right?
And so tell us a little bit about the work specifically that
yes,
you're focused on to help reduce these vulnerabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a lot at our organization. We do direct services. We do policy and advocacy work. And I think it's really essential that local governments put protections in place around development and around affordable housing and do the work of legislating around the market. And so this is the sort of advocacy that we do. And we also build grassroots leadership among community members to be able to define our advocacy work and join in on that work that we do.
Great, thank you so much, Zelalem. And Gary, what kind of climate risk are you facing, and how is your organization tackling them?
Yeah, thanks for that, and appreciate the opportunity to be here, and really appreciate the invitation. It's so inspiring to hear Majora and Dr. Shepard. Well, of course, Los Angeles is a big place, it's larger than many states physically, and 10 million people. So we face every climate risk that you can imagine. We recently actually just completed a comprehensive climate vulnerability assessment for the entire county that looked at the vulnerability of our infrastructure, but more importantly, looked at social vulnerability. And so I'm very aware now of what the hazards are and the risk that they pose. And what we did is actually we took climate models, downscaled them to the census tract scale, so we could see specific climate hazard impacts in specific census tracts, and overlaid that with census data. So for instance, we know areas that are going to face extreme heat, and where, for instance, people may lack access to reliable transit or mobility. And that allows us to start to craft some solutions around specific into those neighborhoods. I think we face, as I said, face a lot of hazards. In fact, FEMA has declared LA County to be the riskiest county in the country, and I don't crow about that the way Dr. Shepard crows about UGA winning the football championship. It's just a fact of our geography, right? We have mountains, we have shorelines, we have low-lying areas, we face extreme heat, we face drought. But the big one, and I think I saw it in the chat as well, is really for us is heat. We know that we're going to have more frequent, more severe, longer heat storms, and in fact, our climate vulnerability assessment projects a tenfold increase from a significant, and by significant we mean multi-day, over 98th percentile heat event that happens right now about every other year to about 5 a year, so a tenfold increase. And that means about 2.2 million people in our county that will have high exposure to extreme heat, and from our analysis, that we know have high social vulnerability. And that's nearly a doubling of the number of people that are at the most risk today. And it's not just health impacts. Heat also has impacts like increased likelihood of workers being injured on the job. And somebody falls off a ladder during a heat storm, you don't attribute it to the heat, but that's in fact what it was. because people get tired, or school children have trouble learning. We know that there are studies that show that cognition decreases during heat events, and crime goes up and mental health suffers. There's a whole range of impacts in our communities. And to Dr. Shepard's point, and something we clearly understood kind of intuitively, but this study now gives us the quantitative data, these impacts, of course, are not evenly distributed across the county, but show that the same kind of racial disparities as other environmental hazards, right? Like our air pollution impacts are concentrated in low-income communities and communities of color, as is contaminated water, exposure to toxics. For example, what our study showed was that our Hispanic Latinx population makes up about half of our county population, but it's actually 2/3 of the population living in the census tract that are most vulnerable to heat are Hispanic and Latinx. So we clearly see those kinds of disproportionate impacts, and those are not by accident. Those are by design. We built a system that did that, and it's a result of the legacy practices of redlining and restrictive covenants and exclusionary zoning and disinvestment, all the things that Majora talked about. But so, we understand the problem, but we're doing a lot to try to address it. And I'll say the first thing is that California law requires cities and counties to actually undertake these analyses and use them to update our general plans. And so we have just completed that process, looking at housing and transportation in our general plan through a climate lens. And I know I've got a lot more we can talk about, but I know we've got limited time.
And I want to come back to that, because I think the monitoring, evaluation, and accountability on that is interesting. But I want to move first to Sharai and get her feedback on how she's working to address the disproportionate impacts of marginalized communities who are facing or on the front lines of climate risk.
Thank you, Camille, and thank you, SGA, for having me. And it's a pleasure to speak with Zelalem and Gary today. My organization is in a little bit of a different position than our first two panelists, so I'll explain a little bit about what we do and the data we provide, and that can hopefully facilitate some conversation around it. So First Street, we're a nonprofit research and technology group dedicated to quantifying and communicating climate-related risk by incorporating the best available modeling techniques and analysis with the most up-to-date science available in order to simply and most effectively inform Americans of their risk today and into the future from all environmental changes. In truth, institutional real estate investors and insurers have long had access to environmental risk data from a limited number of for-profit companies. They use non-transparent methodologies that unfortunately don't advance science and which limit access to risk information for the country. Because of this, the majority of Americans have relied on sources such as FEMA or the US Forest Service and other public agencies to really understand their risk. But however, these agencies are not tasked with defining risk for individual properties, and they don't consider how environmental changes impact that risk in the near-term future. Also, they are often unable to incorporate the latest science due to the bureaucratic and regulatory restrictions within which they are made to operate. And this leaves millions of households and property owners unaware of their true risk. There's long been an urgent need to accurately incorporate property level publicly available environmental risk information in the US based on open source and peer-reviewed science. And in our mission to fill that need, we've developed publicly available risk models in the US. We've begun with flood risk, and we're moving on to wildfire, very excitingly. And we're working to correct that asymmetry of information in the market. And we think that this will empower Americans to protect their most valuable asset, which is their homes, while working with industry and government entities to inform them of their risk as well. We really recognize that in order to grow in the best way possible, data needs to be made publicly available in ways that are digestible to the general public and to practitioners alike. So we work to make this possible by providing flood risk data on multiple platforms like floodfactor.com and real estate sites like Redfin and Realtor. We also provide this information free of charge to leading climate risk and economic researchers in order to help define the impacts of increasing flood risk on the US economy. I mentioned our tool Flood Factor, which is a free online tool that makes it really easy for the average person to learn if their property has flooded in past major events or if it's currently at risk and how that risk changes over time. It also helps to estimate damage costs associated with flooding, or it highlights infrastructure and community risk. Overall, it helps to simplify decisions and decision-making to prepare for the future. The data is available at multiple geographies, as well as including neighborhood, zip code, county, city, and state levels. Lastly, we provide data to commercial and government institutions. Right now, the Federal Reserve Banks, FHFA, HUD, EPA, and other federal agencies all have access to our data and are using it to understand flood risk today and in the future. We think in order to further rectify this asymmetry of knowledge around flood risk in America, we need to provide our property level statistics aggregated to the census tract, zip code, county, and congressional district levels on platforms like the Registry of Open Data on AWS and Esri's Living Atlas and Policy Map sites. We believe that these data access points allow users to fully integrate our statistics into their research, planning documents, and policy decisions in order to adequately plan for both today's risk as well as the future. And we really consider this a necessary service to communities in order to prepare for our growing risk together.
Thank you so much. And you know, in listening to you, all of you, there's this focus on data and making knowledge available and information available. And I'd like to hear from you on if you see major gaps in the data that's accessible. Is it being used? Will it help people make decisions? Do they have access to it? And if not, what other tools could help individuals, especially those that are on the front lines, the vulnerable, constantly in a state of recovery, and having options for themselves? And so I love to hear from you all of that on the you know, the data points and the tools and how to use them. Zelalem, do you want to kick us off? Zelalem, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's Zelalem.
Zelalem.
Yes, but I can definitely kick us off. So I did want to talk about, I mentioned that we do grassroots leadership training. So we have several programs, one focused on climate justice, another on housing justice, and then a newest one on health justice that are multi-week leadership training programs for our community members to learn about those issues. I'm going to go with housing just for the sake of my train of thought, but let's say for the housing one, talk about you know, why we're in a housing crisis, what potential solutions are, and then build up the advocacy skills of the folks taking the course. We offer them in the evenings in different languages. You know, we offer transportation, although they've been virtual due to COVID, dinner, a youth program, but basically like lowering all the barriers that one might have to participation. And then we embed our graduates of those programs into our community organizing work. You know, I think like in terms of housing and planning and zoning, a lot of, you know, that field can be really inaccessible to the everyday person. There's a lot of acronyms and lingo. But I think when that like community education and empowering people with like what those things mean and like the impacts on their, you know, on their everyday lives has like really helped us tremendously in our work. And I know has helped the individuals in those programs as well, and their communities by ripple effect.
And do you feel as though the place in which you live has the right and transparent data to provide to individuals?
Yeah, so I wanted to give an example in regards to data. It depends on what you're looking at, but I know, for example, one of our gaps was around extreme heat, or is around extreme heat. We had heard when we were doing our climate justice course over and over that extreme heat was like the #1 impact that Miamians were feeling. But sea level rise was the thing that was getting the most attention at the time. And so when we asked government, can we work on extreme heat? We're hearing this over and over from workers, and especially, the affordability of air conditioning, which is critical for living here, but hard to come by for many. And they told us that they don't collect that data, so they can't address the problem because they don't have the data. So they don't think it's a problem. So we partnered with a local university, Florida International University, to do citizen science days where we collected heat and humidity data in the places, parks and bus stops and places that were important to people that we work with. And now, like, fast forward, that was like in 2018 when we started that. But fast forward, we have like the first chief heat officer, I think, in the world, Miami-Dade County, and we're working with them to carry forth that data into action. So yeah, that's one example.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Gero, you also mentioned around the heat, and you're also collecting a lot of data. Do you feel like there are gaps and ways that you're using it or could be using it for people to make more informed decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually, before we did our climate vulnerability assessment, we did a comprehensive sustainability plan for the county. And we came up with a list of indicator data that we thought would be ideal, and then went out to try to find that. Discovered a lot of it didn't exist, or isn't updated regularly, isn't updated according to the same methodology. So we actually published a data gaps a memo as part of our sustainability plan. It's one of the resources that that points out where there are gaps in our knowledge around these issues. And certainly on climate, flood is a big one. FEMA relies, of course, on historic data, and we know past is not prelude in this instance because the world is changing. But we also, we relied on census data, and census data has its own deficiencies. It doesn't capture well certain communities, including Native and tribal communities, people experiencing homelessness, undocumented individuals or families. And so we recognized that there were gaps there, and we actually worked hard to fill those gaps. Not everything can be solved with numbers, and really community engagement, I think, as Zelalem points out, is critical. We actually, to supplement our climate vulnerability assessment, went out and did a series of listening sessions with specific groups that we felt were underrepresented in the information we had. And that included outdoor workers and people with disabilities and people without reliable access to transportation. And in our rural communities, not all of LA County is urban, although of course the vast majority of it is. But also our local and tribal nations and organizations that represent tribal nations. And then people experiencing homelessness. And we heard a lot of interesting things. We heard about domestic workers who were left behind during wildfire to defend the property with a garden hose, or those same workers who had to evacuate on foot because transit had been stopped. And then as they were evacuating on foot, were racially profiled by the police. So there's a lot that can be gained from just sitting down and talking to people and listening to people. That data just can't fill out. And if you look at the vulnerability assessment, you see it reflects that sort of broader, more holistic view of our communities.
Thank you. And Sharai, I know this is your area. can you add to this? And also, you know, I work across Louisiana. We have a lot of communities without the capacity to gather data. And so what are some tools for those areas with less capacity to be able to obtain and utilize?
Absolutely. So, you know, to start, I think if I can explain the difference between our model and FEMA's, I think that would really help shed some light on that question and specifically on that question. So I think for this portion, I'll focus on the flood model. We are moving into wildfire, but flood is what we've built our entire organization off of thus far. You know, and so our model allows for this understanding of risk from any type of flooding event. That includes fluvial, riverine, pluvial, rainfall, storm surge, and tidal sources. And I'll just pause for a minute, and I want to give a shout out to the ASL interpreter. Thank you for staying on board with me through this technical portion that I will be talking about here. So thank you, Antonio. This is, you know, incorporating these different types of flood events. This is the first aspect of including climate that I think is really important to understand based on FEMA's current methodology, which only takes into account coastal surge and fluvial or riverine flooding. For example, you may have noticed that rainfall seems to be increasing, and you would definitely be right. A key finding of ours is that many more American homes and businesses are at risk of severe flooding than has been previously understood. So FEMA has classified 8.7 million properties as having substantial risk or being within the special flood hazard area. Our model has identified nearly 70% more, or 14.6 million properties with the same level of risk. So this means that approximately 6 million households and property owners have underestimated or been unaware of their current risk. And this discrepancy exists because we use current climate data, map precipitation as a standalone risk, include areas that FEMA has not mapped. Actually, 40% of the US has not even been mapped by FEMA, which I always find to be a really startling statistic. So when we adjust for future environmental factors like sea level change, warming sea surface and atmospheric temperatures, and changing precip patterns, our flood model finds that the number of property with substantial risk grows by 2050 to 16.2 million. Washington, D.C., Utah, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho show the greatest difference between the First Street Foundation model and FEMA's special flood area designation. So while our model does allow for the understanding of risk from any type of flooding event, by taking into account riverine, rainfall, storm surge, and tidal sources, it also incorporates future conditions in its process. And that's really important to understand. Each of these flood sources has been and continues to be impacted by changing environmental factors in different ways. And making sure to model that and bring it into the modeling process, we make sure to integrate those considerations directly into our final risk statistics. We've built these environmental factors into the model with guidance from the IPCC. We use their RCP curve of their CMIP5 model. We use the 4.5 curve in particular. And we model that with high resolution flood risk layers, ultimately contribute to what makes our model unique and gives us more coverage, precision, and climate adjusted data sets. So beyond this parcel level, property level information, we found that it would be really useful, particularly to people in the smart growth field. We wanted to develop research and findings on community risk to flooding. So we developed a report which research provides the first ever nationwide understanding of community vulnerability to flooding. And it adds this kind of critical new dimension of proximity to flooding to each American's personal understanding of their flood risks based on the broader impact of their community. So we wanted to increase awareness for homeowners who might not have specific risk on their individual property, but had lived within a community and a neighborhood that did have risk. We want to elevate this urgency around climate change risk in particular. So our property assesses risk to places like residential properties, roads, commercial properties, critical infrastructure like airports, fire stations, hospitals, power stations, Superfund sites, and social infrastructure like government buildings, historic buildings, museums, etc. And we quantify risk as the unique level of flooding for each infrastructure type relative to operational thresholds. And those were established by the federal government. We found that distinct patterns of county level community risk significantly increase along the Atlantic and Gulf coasts, and large increases in risk in the Northwest as well. It's often concentrated in coastal areas of the Southeast, and additionally, which some people find surprising, in the Appalachian Mountain region, or Appalachian, depending on where you're from. Among the county that has the most risk is Washington County, North Carolina. Its flood risk is increasing, with a 100% increase in critical infrastructure flooding, a 50% increase in the flooding of residential properties, a 51% increase in the risk of flooding to commercial properties, and a 32% increase in the flooding of roads by the year 2051. For reference, the racial makeup of Washington County, North Carolina is 49% Black, 48% white, 2% Hispanic. It has a median income of $36,000 and an increasing poverty rate of 22%. We think that this analysis can help guide policymakers in driving investments to strengthen and build new and existing infrastructure to protect communities. And this community risk data hopefully will facilitate collaboration within and across communities. It will allow for better funding for adaptation and mitigation strategies. Perhaps it can streamline permitting at higher levels and include higher levels of civic engagement. We found that previous levels of assessing current day risk at the national level were not necessarily suitable for resilience planning, as they don't include quantified risk under actual current or future climate conditions. And so we're hoping that our research and our freely available data will help rectify those issues.
Well, that's really, really important. It seems like a great marriage because Gary, you were just mentioning that a lot of the data doesn't incorporate future climate risk. And then Sharai said that a lot of the West hasn't been mapped yet. And so how can we, there's a question in the Q&A, and this brings in to the housing piece as well. Texas just passed a law ensuring that landlords disclose flood risk to renters. It does put the burden on the renter for the flood insurance, but how can we use data to make sure that it helps those that most need the help instead of putting more burden on them? Anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I can jump in. I think from a government perspective, and I'm the local government representative here on this panel, we think about the tools that we can bring to try to protect our communities from these kinds of risks, of course. And having an understanding of the risks themselves is critical. But once you have that understanding, then the most important part is to actually be able to act on those risks and to start to design policies and programs and implement land use tools that will help overcome those risks. And I think some of that is public education and outreach, and certainly we're doing a fair amount of that. But some of that really is the grinding of the sausage, to use a metaphor, overused metaphor probably, on how we do our work. And I think a couple of things that we're doing, I think, that are informative in this, it really is going to this sense of trying to overcome legacy and in some cases still ongoing racist practices in our own work. is we've adopted recently what we call a green zones ordinance, which comes after about 6 years of work where we worked with community-based organizations in communities where hazardous sites like chrome plating or auto dismantling were adjacent to sensitive uses like housing and schools. And we've adopted land use policy now, rezoned those neighborhoods to eliminate those uses and encourage cleaner uses within the communities. And we still want jobs in the communities. We want clean jobs, but we also don't want to have people face the undue pollution. And, and there's also, and I think we've seen a lot about this, the displacement caused by highway construction. And that's an area where we are also very actively working. We've seen recently the Biden administration, again, using the power of government to halt freeway expansion here in Southern California that actually connected our ports to warehouses inland. And those of you in the country who get goods from the ports of Los Angeles, which is 40% of all the shipped goods in the country come through the ports here. Most of those goods follow a single corridor called the 710 corridor. And of course, there were plans to expand that to allow for more goods. Well, who lives along the 710 corridor, of course, are communities of color who are faced an undue burden from air pollution from the tens of thousands of trucks that go through every day. One last thing maybe I'll mention, again, from a government perspective on the things we can do. The city of Santa Monica is actually trying to redress some of those past wrongs around displacement from freeways that tore the heart out of a Black community here in Santa Monica back in the 1950s and 60s by offering priority to affordable housing to families, the 600 families that were displaced by that freeway construction so long ago. Los Angeles, Santa Monica is a highly desirable place for people to live. And so recognizing those past injustices, this city is moving forward as they build new affordable housing units to make them available to those families that are displaced. And that's just a sampling of some of the ways that we're using land use tools and policies to try to address some of these risks and overcome some of these past injustices.
Thank you for that. Zelalem, do you have anything that you want to add?
I'm actually reading the questions in the chat. So I see some others, but no, I think Gary did a very thorough job.
Is there one that jumps out to you that you wanna hit on?
Yeah, I saw one from Susan Poplin about the heat chief heat officer. And asking what they do specifically. So I don't have I don't work for the county, but from what I know from Miami-Dade County, they both interface with other levels of government. So the National Weather Service, for example, the way we define a heat event is often, what we found from our research is that there was a difference between 30 degrees and National Weather Service thermometers and what we were feeling in the ground in some neighborhoods. So having that thread of communication with, I think, federal departments is really important to have, the right warnings in place for the public. So that working within other levels of government and then with nonprofits like ours, and worker organizations. We have a big agricultural community to try to move forward a lot of the quality of life issues. And of course, neighborhood quality and tree cover and those sorts of things. So yeah, I think I'm sure there's a lot more, and I'll have to time will tell. They started late last year, but we're really, really excited about the position and that there's newfound attention on this issue.
Thank you. So any other comments or thoughts, and Sharai, before we head into other Q&A from the guest?
Sure. I think in terms of, not continuing to add burden to those that may already hold most of the burden and are vulnerable. I think, there's often a lot of fear around incorporating new data and changes and what it can do to exacerbate vulnerability and the burden. But first, before we move and react to fear, I think we really need to understand what the current risk is and who is holding that responsibility already. I think what's really interesting around a lot of this NFIP talk and just, we work with FEMA and we tell them about our data coming out, but because of the nature of the organization, we don't get information back. So when I speak about NFIP, it's really just what I read in the news and what as much as I can be informed as anybody else. But, I think it's interesting to learn that current policyholders within the NFIP program with lower value homes are actually paying more than they should, and policyholders with higher value homes are paying less than they should. And so this risk rating 2.0 that is going to be released, or that I think was just released, is working to rectify it, which is it can produce this fear response. We want to make sure that actually that we're helping those that may be disproportionately paying for homes along the coast, for example.
Can I ask you to dive a little bit into that, because the adjustments of risk rating 2.0 will lead to big changes in the housing market and vulnerable places. Could you tell everyone a little bit about the implications of what that is and the projections of it?
Unfortunately, I can't really speak about NFIP's research in particular. I wish one of my colleagues was here to say more on that, but we do have a lot of resources on First Street that can dive into it. Generally, we try to keep ourselves apart from FEMA and work with them and say that we are another option versus commenting on them. I know I did open the door, Camille, so apologies for that.
No, and Catherine's putting more information in the chat, but I think
Catherine.
Generally speaking, it's beginning to look at flood risk at a parcel level versus a community level, which could have really big implications on housing. And so in a place like Louisiana, we pay real close attention to it. So
yeah, I think particularly there's a way to think about NFIP versus other flood or climate, let's say, data sets that are available, First Street and many others that exist. And really, we want to be able to apply the model based on the right question. And that's something I like to say, which is that all models are wrong, all models are incorrect, but every single model can help answer a specific question. So I think you're right, Camille, in bringing up that the difference with risk rating 2.0 is that it will become more granular, like the First Street model is, and it will help us make assessments at the community level by using parcel level analyses. And that's something that's different than what we've seen before. And I'm hoping that it can help us as a country make more regulatory policies that help us to adapt. Because right now, as great as the First Street model is, it cannot be used for regulatory purposes until policymakers say that it should be. Really, right now, people like Gary have to rely on the FEMA floodplains in order to make regulatory decisions, because that is the standard that's used. And love to hear Gary's thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. For regulatory decisions, for sure, we're bound by those kinds of models. But I think, and I've actually been taking notes here because I think this is great work that you've done, and for planning purposes, the kinds of work that you've done can be applied and can be applied today. We're not bound by any specific rules on what models we use and what sort of projections we use to identify these risks. So we've already got to update the flood portion of our climate vulnerability assessment based on the work that you've done. But I do want to go back to one other question about gaps in heat, because I think there is a critical one that we identified, and it's not a sort of community-wide data gap. It's after we finished our work, we wanted to know what the county was spending on extreme heat events. And so we went and talked to our budget director and our risk manager and the director of our library department, where we open cooling centers and a whole host of others, our Office of Emergency Services, and nobody could tell us. So we had a serious data gap just knowing what our costs were during an extreme heat event. And of course, we run the hospitals of last resort, and during extreme heat events, heat storms, we see more emergency room visits and all the rest. And so one of the things we're going to be doing, I managed to convince our chief executive officer of the county that next year in department head goals, that every department head should be identifying their costs related to extreme heat. And that's actually, knowing that is one thing, but how you act on that information is another. And one of the things that we are looking at is a notion of parametric insurance, which is something we have for earthquakes. When there's a major earthquake over a certain threshold, we're insured as a county to cover the costs that we have in responding to that emergency. Given the tenfold increase in heat events that we expect, we think that it's critical to have that kind of insurance for heat as well. And we are looking at very seriously a heat officer position. And one of the first things we're looking at is naming and ranking of heat storms. You've got hurricanes, of course, by their name and by the numerical ranking of how severe they're going to be. We don't do that for heat, and it doesn't really penetrate the public consciousness when you say, oh, we're going to be facing extreme heat over the next several days. Stay indoors, get plenty of water. People don't have a sense of how bad it's going to be, but I think we need to have a sense, and we need to, in order to sort of crystallize it in people's minds, provide naming and ranking of heat storms, just as we do for other kinds of weather-related events. So that's one of the things that our heat officer is going to be working on, and we've been working with the Arst Rockefeller Foundation on that.
Great, thank you so much. And I've got about 7 more minutes before I'm handing over to Calvin, and so we'll go to the Q&A. And so the first question is, how have you seen code and regulatory barriers to implementing data-generated solutions?
I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I'll say there's definitely, our building codes, project or require that you do modeling of what the cooling load on a building is going to be and how much water it needs to be able to manage during a precipitation event, and what kind of heating load it might need if it's in a mountainous area. And all of that is based on historic data. Again, we have climate projections. We use them for our climate vulnerability assessment. And moving forward, I think we need to make sure that we're building climate resilience into the infrastructure. We've got a lot of money coming down from Washington for infrastructure, and that infrastructure needs to be built in a way that reflects future climatic conditions rather than past climatic conditions.
Any other thoughts there on ensuring our codes are building resilience in a climate-ready future? Okay. So There's another question. I'm curious what steps you or others are taking around weather flood risk data for properties and making it transparent and available to renters.
Sure, I can start with that and then pass over to Zelalem or Gary. I mentioned the first portion of my question that Camille asked, that we have a number of ways of producing research and sharing it, disseminating with the public. And actually, it's really integral to our entire mission to do that. Not only homeowners, but renters as well. So thank you for pointing that out. Our tool floodfactor.com is completely free and accessible to people with an internet connection. And additionally, we encourage government agencies to take flood factor, take a widget and put it on their own government resource, so it can be used directly into the site. The second way that we're producing information for renters, particularly if they want to understand the risk to other buildings in their communities, through this aggregated level statistics. And you can find that by going on Esri and typing in Living Atlas, and then typing in First Street, and you'll see all of our different maps that pop up. You can find it at your census tract, your zip code level, but specifically if a renter is looking for information on their property or a future property they want to move to, they can go to Flood Factor. The other way is through real estate sites. We realize that the population, whether they're home buyers or renters, is going to go to real estate sites like realtor.com or Redfin, including other ones, and they're going to look at, for example, how good are the schools in this property that I want to live in? How good is the surrounding schools? So we decided to take that same philosophy and apply it to climate risk. And we said, let's give our data to these real estate sites, so someone doesn't have to go to floodfactor.com. Someone doesn't have to go to their government site. They can have all the information around climate risk that they need just by looking at these real estate platforms. So First Street, we work to integrate our data into platforms and systems that are already being used by the general public, including renters. And we find that that's so far been a really effective way for getting out the word around flood risk in particular.
Thank you so much. And there's another question around the role of citizen science. And Zelalem, I'd like to ask you about the role of citizen science, given the work that you do.
Yeah, I think I shared about our extreme heat citizen science work. The university I mentioned also does that for sea level rise as well. I think it's called Sea Level Solutions Day, where you go out and do the measuring. And yeah, I think when there are data gaps, like especially in taking into account heat or even flooding, like the models don't necessarily reflect lived experience. They can't go down to like a certain drain on your block, right? Both our cities and counties are, asking the public, they have apps like to call 311 or, things like that to, help them begin to address the issue. But yeah, I think I saw that question about it being incorporated into a high school curriculum. I think that's a really amazing idea. Not only, I think it helps give people like because climate change is so overwhelming, it can feel like you're just, this is such a big issue, but it gives people hands-on, not only skills, but that feeling of, like contributing to the solutions in a really unique way. So I would definitely recommend it. Happy to share what we've done. And I saw folks sharing so many good resources from across the country. So I hope that person does implement it in their work.
Great. Thank you all so much. I'd like to do a quick round robin before I hand it over to SGA's President and CEO, Calvin Gladney. We are at the Smart Growth America Conference. This is where the Smart Growth movement started. How can the Smart Growth practitioners across the U.S. embrace climate change and planning for our futures, what's the one thing we need to do? How do we tackle this big existential threat that we've got and turn it into an opportunity? And I know it's a big question, but would love to hear your off the cuff remark on that just real quickly. Gary, I'll start with you.
Yeah,
Since you smiled first.
I did, because it is a ginormous question. But really, I think California has shown leadership in climate for a while, and not the only state by any means, and eclipsed, I think, more recently by some other states in terms of the aggressiveness of some of its climate policies. But part of the rationale that both we locally and we kind of statewide use for taking on this tough issue and a global issue, which we know that we can't solve all by ourselves. We could shut down the county, we could shut down the state, and have a marginal impact on global climate change. But we really see it as an economic opportunity, a chance to position our economy for the 21st century. And now we've been saying that for 20 years. But as it turns out, this really is true economic opportunity, whether it's clean energy jobs, which wind and solar jobs are far more outstrip fossil fuel jobs in the state of California, and we produce a lot of oil still locally and in the state, but certainly not nearly as many workers in those industries as in clean energy. And we've been, we as an example, we adopted a requirement that transit agencies here in Los Angeles move to 100% electric buses by 2030, which is a very short time frame, the next 8 years. And we adopted that about 2 years ago. What that led to actually is 3 electric bus manufacturers opening manufacturing plants here in Los Angeles County. And those are providing good, family-sustaining, high-road union jobs for our communities. And that's why we're addressing climate change. Of course, we're doing it for the public health impacts and because of the existential threat that climate change represents, but we're also doing it because we know that if we're out first, we're going to be able to grab the economic opportunities that come along with it.
Great, thank you. Sharai, are you ready?
Sure, I'm ready. I would say my advice to everyone is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. I think often we're looking for the most applicable model, the best research, the best data. And while I do believe and apply those philosophies to my own practice and to our modeling process, I think in terms of picking a North Star and sticking with it and moving in that direction is the best possible thing we all can do at this moment, particularly in the absence of having federal guidance on how to prepare for climate change. The federal government provides amazing information, amazing data for nonprofits like First Street Foundation to create information, but we don't have recommendations, for example, on saying we should be using the RCP 4.5 curve versus the 6.5 versus the 8, and that's okay. We can pick a curve, we can stick with it, we can model it, and we can say this is the known risk and move in that direction. We might not be 100% accurate all the time, but no model can provide that level of assurance. And if we can stick to one direction and move in it together, as obvious as that is, I think it's actually important to state because of our tendency as practitioners to need all of our ducks in a row, our T's crossed and our I's dotted before we, legislate policy and things of that nature. That's my biggest thing that comes to mind at the moment.
Thank you so much, Sharai, for that. Zelalem, you get the last word.
Yeah, I want to underline Sharai's sentiment that we need to act now, and add just one thing to that, which is that the root cause of the climate crisis is greed. It's the same greed that causes, corporations to abuse the environment, is that greed that abuses people and upholds systems of oppression. And so in our climate solutions, if it's not upending that system, if it's hurting people or leaving people out in our climate solutions, then it's not a true solution. So keep that in mind as you move forward your work. Be wary of false solutions as well. But yes, we do need to act as fast as possible.
What an important point to end on. Thank you so much all for your leadership. And there is our smart growth leader, Calvin. I'm handing over to you now.
Oh my goodness, man, the root cause of the climate crisis is greed. I mean, come on. Zelalem is dropping knowledge at the very end. And then Sharai said something like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. And Gary had so many gems that I can't take too long on my closing to put them all in at once. So wanted to thank the panelists. Thank you, Camille, for your expert moderation and for being on our board. Thank you so much. And wanted to thank everybody in the audience for just being with us today. We've had such a great time. And the chat has been on fire. And that allows me to make my thermal justice reference with Dr. Marshall Shepard, who was awesome. But also, there's just been so many resources discussed in the chat, and we're going to try to compile all of them. But we just wanted to share a couple of our kind of signature reports with you that also dig into these issues, whether it's our zoned in report, which really focuses kind of on a quantitative and qualitative analysis to show why form-based zoning, as opposed to Euclidean zoning, where everything has to have separate kind of identities, how you can use form-based codes to have a significant positive impact on the economic performance of communities, and frankly, to advance racial equity. You also see our driving down emissions report, which really shows in a very smart, growthy kind of way, and the panel as well talk through this, the kind of intersection of transportation, land use, and climate change, and how we can get to not only better climate change mitigation, but adaptation in a way that is equitable. And I really like the way the panel was structured, in the sense of having a community organization, a local government person, as well as a private data provider. So if anybody in the audience has ideas on how SGA can work better with community groups, with local government officials, or even private providers to get to equitable climate adaptation, please let us know. And hey, tweet at me as well at Smart Growth CEO if you want to talk more about these. The final resource that we're mentioning here is the Great Real Estate Reset, which is actually SGA's partnership with the Brookings Institution and also our Locust team to really think about what has been happening in the real estate industry and land use, and talk about the kind of 5 trends that are converging that really creates a mismatch between the things that we have been doing and where the real estate industry is going, and what they should or shouldn't build. Particularly thinking about those questions in terms of how do we advance racial equity and get to an economy where everyone gets a chance to succeed. So definitely a reminder to tag us on social media and share your thoughts. You can see all of the various links, but wanted to share with you just the exciting day 2. Tomorrow's day, led by our Transportation and Thriving Communities team, is really thinking about transportation and infrastructure. It's going to be led by our very own Beth Osborne, who many of you probably know from her On Fire Twitter handle as well. And she's going to kick us off and lead a keynote presentation by, I'm going to have to say it, the first and only TikTok star to appear at our Equity Summit. You may know him if you follow his TikTok handle with the other 1 million followers he has, or his Instagram handle. You may know him as Mr. Barricade, but his real name is Vignesh Swaminathan, and he's the CEO and president of Crossroad Lab. And if you don't know him already, you are in for a treat. You should definitely show up and show out tomorrow in the chat. Then we're gonna have an awesome panel discussion with I will call, and if Reagan is listening, my favorite fellow panelist. We've been on 3 panels just in the last year alone together. Dr. Reagan Patterson is a Transportation Equity Research Fellow at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and she's going to be joined by panelists Tiffany Chu, Bob Dean, and Kim Lucas, as you can see on the screen. And they're just going to have a pretty awesome discussion again about how we can leverage technology and technological tools to better elevate community voice, as well as get to more equitable outcomes when it comes to infrastructure and transportation investments. So stay tuned for that. And then finally, just wanted to quickly give a final shout out to our main sponsors. Again, thank you to our event sponsor, Citi. Special shout out to Chris Brown and the team, Florencia and others, for their variety of their backing and their support, and again, to their action for racial equity. Wanted to give a specific shout out to our presenting sponsors as well, City Health, which is an initiative of DeBeaumont and Kaiser, and NeighborWorks America. And then finally, last but not least, our closed captioning sponsor, AARP, and also a good partner of SGA, Transportation for America, and the Smart Growth Movement. We wouldn't have the closed captioning and ASL support that we do have without the generous support of AARP. And this summit is just not possible without these sponsors and our silver and gold sponsors as well. So wanted to just end the day thanking them on their graceful and generous sponsorship of the event to allow us to get such great speakers to you. Just wanted to make one last closing note. Definitely join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. Send any questions to summit at smartgrowthamerica.org. Obviously, you can add us at our various Twitter handles. But the other exciting news that I wanted to say is we've got just such great feedback from all of you and support from sponsors, and just see the impact the Equity Summit has had and can have, that we're going to turn this not into a one-time event, but we're actually going to evolve the Equity Summit into an ongoing set of programs and events over the course of 2022. We're very excited about this opportunity to take the things that you heard today and the issues and comments and everything in the chat that you'll hear over the next 2 days, and take deeper dives on specific issues. For example, rural America, and how all of these issues and challenges and opportunities apply to rural America. Bring more conversations about, the federal agencies who are key partners at the table, and on and on and on. So stay tuned for more information on all of those follow-up events. Again, thank you for joining us today. We were so excited to see you. We're so excited to see you tomorrow, and hope to see you back here bright and kind of early at 11 a.m. Eastern. Until then, you take good care. Bye now.